Do we go?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Since we're filming.
The mics, just so you know, is for the recording. So me speaking into that is not going to affect you guys. Okay? So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So welcome to our alumni panel. Thank you, alumni, for being here. I'm so excited, especially to hear everything that you have to say. And because we're going to end with the alumni panel, I just want to say, please eat the food on your way out. We don't want to take it home. Please ask any questions after. Grab one of us if you have questions. And please follow up with me next week if you're interested in joining our school. We do private tours, and so come see the classrooms in action during the day. And there's a lot more I could tell you all about the admissions process, but that is not that important in this moment. So I'm going to introduce my husband, Shane Valentine, who is going to moderate our alumni talk today. And thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So thank you all for sticking around. I want to thank and welcome our panel. Can we get a little round of applause for them taking time on a Saturday to come back to school? So I'm sure they were thrilled about. No. So this is the highlight of the open house. It traditionally is, and so I'm really excited to moderate this and have them share their stories of rooted in a Waldorf education. Some have graduated from this school, some other Waldorf schools. And so we don't run out of time. I want to get right into it. So what I'll do is each one of them will introduce themselves, take 2 or 3 minutes, and kind of share with them what they, how they ended up in this seat. What are they doing? How did they get there? So what Waldorf school they attended, what high school, college, degrees, like a little bit of their journey, brief, because we can dive into it a little bit later. And then if you could highlight in that story those transition points. Because a lot of times that comes up in open houses of people trying to, what is Waldorf? Is Waldorf right for me? Is what is it like when they leave here and they go to high school? And then the high school to college and that readiness, those transitions. So if you can spend just a minute on some of those transition points as you go through your story, that'd be great. So with that, I am going to have Adriana go first. And if you could and then just pass down, and then we'll get into individual questions, okay? Yeah.
I'm Adriana Livingston. I attended this Marin Waldorf school from kindergarten.
Hold the mic.
Thank you.
Okay, you're on. I'm Adriana Livingston. I attended this Waldorf school from kindergarten to 8th grade. And then I went to a public high school, which was Sonoma Valley High, just over the hills in Sonoma. And from Sonoma Valley High, where I swam and played water polo in varsity level, I went to the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. And there I became a naval officer, and also I majored in oceanography, a bachelor's of science in oceanography, with almost a minor in mathematics. And then after I graduated, I was commissioned a naval officer. And then I got stationed in San Diego on board the USS Denver, LPD-9, and a dock landing ship which had Marines on board and a crew of 500. And I was the electrical division officer in charge of a division of, at that time I think it was 40 sailors with the electrical division working on all the different electrician plants on the ship. We had a diesel engine, but then all the electrical on board as well. And then I served for 5 years, which was my obligated time. And when I got out of the Navy and got back into civilian life, I did some soul searching, and I kind of looked at myself and what do I want to do? I had leadership training. I had the ability to be an executive in a company. And I looked around and I really looked at myself and looked at what is it that I really could see from my Waldorf education that I brought into the Navy and then came back out of the Navy that I thought was really important. And being able to see people in a very open way, being able to work with all different people, all different cultures, all different things in the Navy, and actually people who were in the Navy and people who were outside the Navy that we were helping in the Navy, and realizing that these gifts that I had came from my Waldorf education. And so I said, you know what, I really think these are great things. I want to bring this to the future, and so I decided I was going to become a Waldorf teacher. And so I went to the Waldorf Institute of Southern California in San Diego and got my teaching credentials in Waldorf education, and also taught at the Waldorf School of San Diego. And upon my graduation from the program, I moved back up here and married one of my classmates, who was my first kiss in Waldorf here at the school. And now we have a 6-year-old who is in the other kindergarten class next door with teacher Hans, and who will be in first grade next year.
Thank you. So Jasper, really quick. So we have seats in the front. So does anyone want to come up? We'll take a half a second. Please fill in. There's plenty in the front, plenty on the right. Anybody else, please? We're a little directing and editing with the right? Okay, ready.
Thank you. Thank you. That was such a wonderful story. So I'm Jasper van Brakel, originally from the Netherlands, and that's where I went through Waldorf education K through 12. So not this school. So why am I here? Well, one of our daughters in the back is a 7th grader, and then we have a 5th grader, a 2nd grader, and a preschooler in this school. So we're pretty committed to this community. So my journey, just briefly, and again, this was, I graduated Waldorf High School in '92 in the Netherlands. So there are some differences, but there are also commonalities and things that we really recognize that are just intrinsic to Waldorf education that we find here as well. So my journey was, after graduating from Waldorf, I decided I wanted to become an economist. So I went to college, to grad school, graduated with a master's in economics in Rotterdam, and then went very traditionally into consulting, project management. I did some sales, account management, etc. And then after about 4 years, a good friend of mine, not coincidentally also a Waldorf alum, who and there are connections to other parents here as well, Bas Schneiders, he introduced me to folks at Weleda, the skincare and medicine company in Switzerland and in Germany. And long story short, we moved to Stuttgart, and I took up a job there, did marketing and sales work, and then after about 6 years was asked to move to New York to take on the job of CEO for North America. So we moved from Germany to this country in 2008, just before the last recession hit, literally 2 months before. That was an interesting time, and I also went back to school, to Harvard Business School, to really round out my profile around general management and management generally. After doing that for 7 years, the CEO job for Weleda, and some additional international work in Switzerland, as well as back in Belgium and in Holland, I found myself also at a point where I said, well, what am I going to do when I grow up? What am I going to do? And I really took time to think about that and to deepen some connections, and ended up accepting a job as CEO for RSF Social Finance in San Francisco, which I started about 9 months ago, and that's why we're here. And really looking back at the experience of Waldorf, I think it prepared me exactly for those transition moments, and I'm happy to go into more detail later if that's helpful. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elena Fitapelli. I graduated from this school in 2007. I came to Marin Waldorf in 4th grade when my family and I immigrated from Uruguay, a tiny country in South America. But I did go to Waldorf school, the only Waldorf school in Uruguay, since I was 2, so I've had the Waldorf experience all throughout. After Marin Waldorf, I went on to Marin Catholic for high school. And after that, I got my BA in International Studies and a BA in Political Science from Dominican University. And after that, I went on to get my master's in Latin American studies, focused on Latin American politics at Stanford. And after that, I stayed at Stanford for 2 more years working. I worked running a research initiative at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. And then I became the executive assistant to Michael McFaul, who some of you may know from the news. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. And considering all the news on Russia, he's very often on the news. And so I worked for him until November. And then I needed, I still need a change of environment. I've been in the academic world ever since I entered it. And so I need right now a change. I also realized in the past 2 years working, in a real job, that I'm not the kind of person that can necessarily be in front of a computer for 9 hours a day. So I went to India to do my yoga teacher training just over the past 2 months. I came back a week and a half ago, and I'm now looking for a position that will allow me to be more interactive with people, particularly with my background in political science. I would like to work with refugees and migrants, probably in Europe. So I'm at that transition right now. And I can tell you that from every other transition, and I think the most noticeable one maybe was actually from Marin Waldorf to high school. I went to a very stereotypical high school where, there were the jocks, there were the cheerleaders, like the typical high school. And it was a big change, but I was actually surprised of how ready I was and how I noticed the difference between me and the other kids, but in a very positive way, because I felt like I had, and this happened to me throughout this until today, that I think Waldorf really gave me that ability to look outside of the box when there's a problem, or when a teacher is teaching and they're explaining something, and look outside and think about, okay, why? How does that work? And how does this that this teacher is telling me compare to other things that I've seen in my life or learned before? And that kind of like analytical thinking and being able to step back and see the big picture of what I was learning or what I was doing in a job or in my thesis or whatever, I'm positive that I got that from Waldorf education. And I remember so clearly in the transition, the first few weeks in high school, noticing how my other classmates, not Waldorf alumni, didn't have that. And I was like, I remember I was always the one asking questions in class and getting and the teachers noticed this, of course, getting the discussion going and the conversation going. And I was like, do these kids they don't want to learn? And I remember so clearly thinking about that. So yes, throughout my whole career, which is quite smaller than the rest of but I have really noticed the lessons that I learned from Waldorf have always been there. And as I say, it's not so much about the content that I learned, because I think that I learned the same content and substantive material that everyone else learned, but how to think and how to, deal in this ever-changing world where more than ever, I think that analytical thinking and individual personalities are more important than the nitty-gritty of what we learn. And that's what I think stands myself and everyone here and all Waldorf alumni apart from everyone else. So I will be happy to expand on that.
My name's Jasmine. I went here from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. I graduated in 1998. 8th grade used to be over there, though. From there. It was my choice, actually. I remember my parents offering Summerfield if I was interested, and I chose to go to San Marin High School. I wanted to go to a public school. We graduated with a small class, and there was something in me that was so curious about the public school system. I immediately regretted it. I remember that first week. I remember being so, initially, it was just so many more people. But with time, I settled in and actually really loved it. I had a great time there. But then for university, decided to do something kind of more back towards a Waldorf vibe and went to UC Santa Cruz. I was a legal studies major. My emphasis was social justice and community. I then went on to work at a law firm, and then the recession, when things got a little more complicated, I decided to go work abroad for 5 years. I lived in Shanghai, in China, and worked for an eco-resort. It was a sustainable, the first LEED Platinum certified eco-resort in China, so I got to be a part of that for 5 years, which was really exciting. And then since I've moved back, I live in San Francisco now, and I work for a company called Scoot, which does shared electric vehicles in San Francisco, motor scooters and kick scooters. There, I'm part of the global growth team. I do PR and communications. I run all of the corporate events, and it's kind of a startup vibe, so I get to have my hand in a lot of other things as well. And Waldorf is like so core to me and who I am. I cherish it from everything from my handwriting. I'm still an avid journaler, to how anytime I'm laying out a new event for a layout for a large event, I need to hand sketch everything. Tyler and I were just joking that we were so thrilled to get calculators when we went to high school. We weren't allowed to have calculators. And so when I got my first TI-83, I remember it was like so exciting. I also remember that like lust for learning. We hadn't had grades. I think we were one of the last classes. Maybe we talked our teacher into giving us grades in 8th grade because we like wanted them so badly.
We had to have them to apply to high school.
Oh, right. Okay, so we had them maybe at the very end, but I was so excited to get grades in high school. So I was like, I'm going to get all A's because I've never had grades and I've seen them in the movies. And I remember that, and that really stayed with me. So by the time I got to university and a lot of my other classmates were feeling pretty burnt out, I still had like a really fresh enthusiasm for learning. I remember that. And to this day, I think I thought I was going to be in legal studies for a little while. I worked for the law firm. I had a legal studies major, but then found myself drawn much more to communications and events. I'm a very social, engaged person that wants to work with a lot of people. So I feel really lucky to be in an area now where I do work with a lot of different people. My company is now international too, so I got to be part of the Barcelona launch team, and we also launched in Chile last year. So I think my background from Waldorf too, because every year we were studying a different culture, a different religion, a different handwork. There was such a variety that now no matter where I go, I always can like pull out some little Roman history or geometry or handworking or some little thing that helps me to connect to a lot of different people.
Hi, I'm Tyler Neely. I was in Jasmine's class here at Marin Waldorf. I started my education actually in public school. I attended public school for kindergarten and first grade. And my teacher and my first grade teacher and my mom kind of discussed like maybe, I would do well to have like a more interesting education than just what the public school system could offer. Just something that would, I was a very curious, pretty precocious child, and they wanted to make sure that I got to learn as much as I could and have as many experiences as I could. And it wasn't going to happen in public school for me. It was second grade. I remember watching Home Alone in class. And that was like the last straw for my parents. They took me out. I started here about a month into second grade. And it was a little bit of a change at first. No one was reading yet. I was already reading. But we had this amazing new curriculum that I was being exposed to where you got to do art and, more like the sports we did were more like team building and positive, and it was just like a new world opened up coming here. And I was here through 8th grade, and then I was sort of ready to go, maybe a little more traditional again. I also went to Marin Catholic, which, is a Catholic prep school. It's also, it's in Marin County, so it's still fairly liberal. And there's a spirituality that you have in Waldorf that, kind of carried on going to another school that has, obviously faith base. From there, I went to college in New York. I went to Fordham and New School and studied communications and liberal arts at New School. And then my first job was at a production company in New York. It was owned by a fashion photographer and director who actually went to Waldorf School in Edinburgh in the 40s and 50s. And so that was kind of a cool thing. Like throughout life, I've met people from Germany, from New Jersey, from, the UK who've gone to Waldorf School, and you can kind of connect with people. It's, going to Catholic prep school, like a lot of people have done that too. But like Waldorf is like a much more unique experience where you can like talk to someone about eurythmy, that you wouldn't have expected. So from working in production, I worked in production companies in New York for several years. I worked on a bunch of different things, movies, TV commercials. I worked on a video for the Obama campaign, gotten to do a lot of cool things through that. And then a few years ago, I transitioned to the agency side, moved back to San Francisco, and now I'm a senior producer for an ad agency. I produce commercials you'll see on TV, which, we weren't really allowed to watch growing up. So that's a little bit of a switch, but it's a creative job. It uses the logical part of my brain. It uses, aesthetics and, skills that I learned at Waldorf. One thing that was so huge is not having textbooks. Like I said, I knew how to read from like age 4, but we didn't read books. We were taught a main lesson every day. And it was an interactive thing where you asked your teacher questions and they told you a story and you really like absorbed it in a different way. You took notes. We took like very in-depth notes, and we're able to then like translate the information in our own words. And that has like done so much for me in terms of communication and being able to retain information. And I think that, the Waldorf education is beneficial in that way. And it also, like everyone said, you learn about all these different cultures, you learn about these different religions. It makes you a more empathetic person. You understand more about the world. And I think it's really served me well as a basis for my overall education, my career, and my life. It's about educating the whole person and, not just who you are academically and career-wise, but, being secure in yourself, which is like the greatest gift. So, yeah.
Okay, so we are, just as a time check, coming a little close to time. And I had a bunch, I did my research, I had questions, and it's not about me, it's about you. So what I want to do is, if anyone has questions, we can start that process. Know that at 1 o'clock, if you have kids in childcare, you will need to get them. But we can keep going in here, if that's okay. And then, all right, is that good? Okay, so does anyone have from any of the stories, or anything you saw today, have any questions for any of our panelists specifically? Okay.
How are your reading and writing skills today?
It's amazing what illiteracy happens, right?
So how are your reading and writing skills today? Because everybody's kind of afraid, saying, oh, they don't read at age 7. But you're okay today?
So, Magdalena, I want to, because Jasper and I spoke, so, and then we could share, but I want you to share your story first, and you can pass it down.
Sure. Thank you. So, one of my brothers, who also went through Waldorf K through 12, up until the end of third grade, he couldn't really read, and then up until, it was okay, and then he eventually got there, and up until seventh grade, my parents were saying, well, he's kind of a dreamer, and he'll be okay, he plays the piano, he'll be fine, and he'll be okay. And now, and he's still back in the Netherlands, he's one of the top cardiac surgeons of the country. So at some point in time, he just took off. And because Waldorf education allowed him to learn in his own, at his own speed, and of course, with oversight, it's not like, whatever, right? I mean, there's people really paying attention and figuring out what is the individual learning style. But that was, for me, when we spoke about this, really an example of that, if you pay attention to the individual, these kinds of things can happen.
Yes, I would add that reading writing skills, I think, in fact, we have better reading writing skills than other children because of what she said. We made our own main lesson books. We were listening to stories all the time. So, the diverse vocabulary wasn't just a textbook that they're all pretty much written the same. And then I would actually add to that, that I forgot to say before, she mentioned confidence and presentation skills, which is huge in today's world when, you get your, I lived in Silicon Valley for a bunch of years, so you get your 15 minutes, 15-second elevation speech or elevator speech or whatever. I do have good English is my second language. So, well, anyway, what I was going to say that in high school, in college, even at Stanford, I have been so appalled by how horrible presentation skills many of my classmates had. And that confidence, and maybe, yes, it depends on the person, but that confidence, I mean, we did plays. You had to present all the time, and you couldn't, at least in my class, you couldn't just bring a piece of paper and read it. In your presentations here at Waldorf, you had to say things without paper. You had to really think about what you were going to say and not just memorize. And that's another thing that I really noticed when talking to people that didn't go to Waldorf, that a lot of their learning to me seemed like it had been memorization. And, I don't know, they would teach you, this is the color green. And that's it. And that was the color green. And for me, that's like, okay, this is the color blue plus yellow. It's seen in the grass. You can find it here. If you mix it with this, there was like a whole other side to what I was learning. So I think that makes a big difference when it comes to, career jobs, to be able to present yourself and explain things well.
Great. Does anyone else have? Okay, great.
Kind of a follow-up to the reading and writing. How did you find math and science when you got into the real world? And you graduated at the time the iPhone came out, so you must have gotten into high school with a lot more technology than you probably had here. How was that transition?
Who was that to?
2007, you said, right?
I can answer very quickly
Okay.
about the technology. In Waldorf, Waldorf also evolves. So actually in my class in 8th grade, we did type some things. We were allowed to type some of our essays up, and then we would paste them into our main lesson books. So we had calculators. There was, I think, a bit of technology there. And for the science part, I didn't feel not prepared at all. I felt completely prepared. And like I said before, I felt like I could also understand things from a much wider angle. And instead of knowing, that this chemical reaction happens, I was like, oh yeah, I actually did it, because in Waldorf we mix this and this and this. Right. So it was a much more hands-on scientific knowledge than just reading in a textbook. So I felt completely prepared. I don't know if anyone had
I do.
different experience.
Yeah, so I have Adriana go. I do want to be mindful of our childcare teachers. So before she starts, if anyone needs to go and then come back, thank you all. We'll keep going.
Yeah, we're keeping busy out there. Yeah, right. Next gen.
Exactly.
Sorry. Okay. Way to empty the room out, Shane.
We gotta
You can
solve
come
this
down
problem
and fill
every
in.
year.
Yeah, this is the first time
You can't have this.
I think it was important for Anthony for me to see this.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, it's really neat.
Do you come in the morning? Drop in more?
No,
Okay, you ready? All right.
So you asked about math and science. Math starts in kindergarten. I'm a kindergarten teacher. I see it in kindergarten. And it's all very hands-on, manipulative, getting into it, working with your partner, moving, bouncing balls together and counting and multiplying and adding. And then when you get into the upper grades, getting into geometry and getting into pre-algebra. I went to a public high school and I loved math. And for me, there was a relationship with math where I was like, I wanted to know about it. I wanted to understand the concept. I didn't want to learn the rules. I wanted to understand, why do we have to learn math? What is the math teaching me? What is it connected to? How does it make? So when I was at high school, I loved geometry and I loved doing algebra and doing those high school classes. And then when I went into the Naval Academy, and it's a science, and there's no bachelor's of arts at the Naval Academy, only bachelor's of science. And so science was very big, chemistry, physics. Also doing, because I was an oceanography major, doing three-dimensional vortex math. So getting into weather systems and getting into water systems and tides and everything. And so there was this depth of math that I really had to get into, which now I look at my textbooks that I have at home and I'm like, I knew those things, and now I don't need them, of course, but it was for me really understanding and getting that depth and really wanting to know. And because of my Waldorf education, when I had a question and I didn't quite get it, or maybe on a quiz I just, I'm not really getting this, I had the ability to go to my professor, and I felt very comfortable going to my professor and just saying, hey, can I get some office time with you? And and they were like, oh, he's like, of course, and not many students do that, but I felt so comfortable doing that because I had that relationship with my teachers. And so it was like very comfortable. If I ever needed help, I really felt able to ask for help, able to really dive into not just memorizing, the formulas or the way of the process of doing it, but really wanting to understand why I need to learn this math and what is it going to then step forward for, what am I going to move to the next step with that math. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, yes?
I
Sure.
can speak to that. As I said, that I was so excited to get grades, period, going to high school. I went on for the sciences. I chose to do honors biology, and I remember our final project my senior year, we did a field study, and we had to study a plot of land for a month and report on it and learn as it went from winter into spring. And I took it on like a full Waldorf project. I was like watercoloring and like pressing flowers, and I made a full textbook basically of my field study. And I got an A+++ on that from the teacher, and she was like, I don't even know what to do with this. Like, you like really understand I would like spend so much time down there. And I had like charts and graphs and water temperatures and like other people. Yeah. And other people did great things too, I'm sure. But I remember, I've never since received that grade, but I made a textbook, and that's what they were kind of hoping that we would do. So then I now find myself more in communications, so I do a lot more writing. And while I think those same skills that we learned here, I now actually do a lot of the executive communications for my CEO and president for all of our international media and PR. So I do a lot of like when the questions come in, I do all the responses, get it signed off by my CEO and president, and then send it off to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. So you're going to be fine.
Question? Yeah.
Kind of based on.
Please. Thank you.
Kind of based on the fact that you guys are sharing that the key skill you're teaching or being taught at the school is the desire to acquire knowledge. Would you guys, all of you on the panel, would you all agree with this statement? Is it pervasive throughout the school, throughout different schools? And some of you attended this school, others had an opportunity to attend other schools, because this is really the key skill from what I'm hearing to acquire knowledge. We all move on to our different parts of lives, different areas, but this is what I understand is the most valuable skill being learned here.
Let's go first.
Yeah, I think that there's so much that Waldorf just gives you such a wide breadth of knowledge and teaches you about so many different subjects. When I started in second grade, we were focused on saints. And then third grade, we did Judaism, and fourth grade was Norse mythology, and then we did Greek mythology and Christianity, and you get such insight to all of these different world cultures, world religions, and ideologies. And it definitely, opens the world up. As travel, through traveling, you get to see a lot of stuff that you learned about here. And my brother also says that everything on Jeopardy is something he learned at Waldorf school. But it definitely serves you well. And it's, I always just want to kind of acquire more knowledge. I don't want to just ever, as an adult, just be complacent. I always want, if I'm reading nonfiction, I have a hard time getting through it because everything I read, I'm like, who's this person? I want to know more. Who's that? Where's this place? And I feel this thirst for knowledge is something that will definitely stay with me my whole life, and Waldorf really helped build.
One thing, I would absolutely agree with the statement that Waldorf teaches students to, or inspires students to want to learn 100%. I think that sometimes when I explain Waldorf to people, I explain it as in traditional schools, you have the education system and you have the child, and somehow you try to grab the child and stick it into the education system, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But with Waldorf, you have the system, you have the Waldorf system, and then you have the child, and the system adapts to the child. So I think that if you see little kids running around, they're curious, they have that innate, and I really do think that as humans we have this innate desire to learn, to be curious about things. Of course, things that interest us and things that arise our curiosity. And I think that what Waldorf does, instead of just saying, okay, we have this child, he's curious about this ant, but now we got to teach him math somehow, Waldorf makes that appealing for the child so that it's not you have to teach math and it's this burden that the child needs to learn this. The child wants to because it's presented in an appealing way and it adapts it. So it's just as the ant is appealing to the child and they want to learn about it, math is going to be appealing to the child. And once you learn, I think, that basis of that desire to learn that you learn very early on in kindergarten in Waldorf, it carries out through life because all of a sudden, in the adult mind, okay, I need to learn, project management. So somehow your mind works in a way that makes it appealing and you see it in a way that I want to learn this and I'm gonna learn it. So I think it just changes your mindset. And yeah, I really do think that Waldorf inspires one to want to keep learning.
I want to add just two additional aspects to this, and I think the answer to your question is yes, at least from my perspective. And the aspect I'd like to add is whenever in my current professional role, I'm looking to hire someone, or that happens all the time. Unfortunately, people move on, and you got to hire someone. Do we want, certainly as a financial organization, somebody to be good with numbers? I mean, for sure, right? Do we want somebody to be purely 100% only analytical? Well, that's the mentality that got us into the trouble that we're in, right, as a society. So yes, we need that, but we need something more. And I believe that at Waldorf you get both ends. So yes, you have the analytical skills, but if we want to move out of the environmental, social, many issues that we have and that we face as a society and that our children will face in an even more even more than today, we need a different mentality, and I think there's a lot to be said for that Waldorf offers that. So I wish, as an employer, when we hire people, that there were more Waldorf grads out there so that we could hire them. Honestly, because there's this combination of head, heart, and hands, right? And that's pretty unique. The second thing I wanted to add is I've found over the years that a lot of parents come to Waldorf because of what it's not, right? So there's not a lot of media exposure, and there's not a lot of pressure, certainly not in kindergarten, to learn how to read at age 3 and tests and this and that. And the really interesting thing is at some point in time that flips, and people will stay for what Waldorf is and not stay for what it's not. And I think that's what I'm hearing on this panel, and that's why our children are enrolled in this school, and that's why we're so committed to Waldorf for what it is.
I would also say yes to the same question. And my examples are when I went off to high school. One of my first classes was in a science class, and the desks were in groups of 4 in the classroom, and I sat down with some girls who looked nice and didn't know really anybody in the classroom. And we had our lesson, and here's me. Oh, yes. And everyone's looking at me like, who is this new girl? And I look around, I'm like, I realize at the end of the class, they're so burnt out. They're not interested in the topic. And I was like so used to being interactive with the teacher after class, went back to the teacher, asked her questions, and then, very comfortable in that. And so I noticed that immediately when I went to high school. And then when I was looking for a college, because I was a swimmer and varsity swimmer, I went through that route for my education, for my grades, and that also I was a blue chip recruited athlete for the Naval Academy as well, besides my academics. And when I went to the Naval Academy, that was me going out into the world because I wanted to experience something new and learn something new. Because would you ever think a Waldorf graduate would go into the military? And so I feel like that was something why I made that decision, was because I wanted to learn new things. I wanted to know, what is it like to be in the military? What is the government? How do people behave in that environment? How do people interact in that environment? Is it something that I would like to be in or not be in, and why? And so I feel like that, for those decisions in my life, even going to a public high school, I had the opportunity to go to Summerfield as well, which is a Waldorf high school in Santa Rosa, and I chose to go to a public high school because I wanted to see, what is that? What is that all about? How different people are in the world, and because that was me wanting to educate myself. And then even coming back, becoming a Waldorf teacher, I was like, why? Why did we learn the way we did? Why did they teach us this certain way? And becoming a teacher and actually learning how to teach as a Waldorf was just like, wow, this is so much more deep as learning how we interact with the children in the classroom than how I would have even imagined, not knowing, just going through the education myself and kind of dismissing it and going on with my life, but being able to come back and learn about it because I was interested in it, and it was quite an experience. So, thank you.
All right, so can we give them a round of applause? So again, I want to thank all of you for attending today. I want to thank our panelists for taking time out on a Saturday to give back to our community in this enriching way. Appreciate it. So we were going to end. Do you want a final few words before we dismiss? And then any panels we could talk about after, any snippets if you want to share on camera, we'll do that in the closed room. So with that, I'll pass off to Chantel. Again, thank you all for coming.
So I'll make it short and sweet. Thank you for being here. My heart is full. I am so re-inspired every time that I come to an open house, and I'm running the open house. This is so interesting. I'm so grateful to all 5 of you from the heart. Thank you for being here. We do have a bouquet of flowers to give you, so please take them on your way out. We have a gift for everyone else who has come today too. I should have announced that when we had half the room go get their little ones, and hopefully they're doing it out front. But there's a beautiful tulip bulb for you to take home. Please take one, and every time you look at it, it will grow for a while. It's got the roots on there. And so please take one on your way out. Thank you for all that you brought today. And again, for those of you who are newish, I think most of the new people had to go get their little ones, but please follow up with me directly to learn more about the process of joining our school. Thank you.